You're listening to What's in Store, the official Hardlines podcast series, bringing you the hottest conversations with players in the home improvement retail industry, and brought to you by Geldwen.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rebecca Dumais. I'm the editor of HHIQ magazine, and welcome to our next podcast. Today, we are speaking with David Ian Gray. Dave is the founder and principal of DIG360, and he's also a highly respected Canadian retail advisor. He's headquartered in Vancouver. I will hand it over to you, David. Thanks for joining us today. You'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what else you've been up to lately?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, and I guess longtime fan, new participant in the podcast. I was at your presenting at your Whistler event a couple of years ago and got to meet your team and your constituents, and very impressed. So it's a pleasure for me to be invited on. And yeah, for many years, I've built a practice. It's more than myself, but built a practice really dedicated to supporting primarily Canadian headquartered retail, but also the ecosystem. So we work with landlords and some vendors and tech innovators with sort of a long game of really trying to help that sector stay and remain competitive in the future-proofing it. We work mostly with what I call tier 2 retail chains. We've got great contacts at the big players, but it's tier 2 and strong independents that are more underserved, and we're always trying to find ways to bring a little value to all of them, and a little value back to us.
In terms of supply and demand shocks since 2020, have you observed like weaker models and firms that you're finding that's been exposed in the industry? I think you've got something about a Darwinian theme there.
Yeah, for a long time, when in my keynotes, I talk about the Darwinian nature of retail, and by that I don't mean Canada's very interesting in all the sectors. We've got some very dominant players that are big. And it really becomes an oligopoly, if not a monopoly. And I'm thinking, you can talk about banks, but the grocers and home improvement, you've got some very big behemoths here. And then it quickly goes down to a lot of regional players. They can still be chains, but there's a lot of expressive businesses in the space, and some have been around a long time, some are arriving on the scene. And if you just think about that metaphor of the Darwinian pond where all the organisms are evolving, and out of that comes the next creature, a success story that's evolving. That's what I see retail as. It's very different from a lot of other sectors. And what I find is when there's times of call it chaos, a lot of interesting things emerge from that on the other side. But it also means that if a retailer or any kind of enterprise is kind of misaligned as a model with its market, or if it's got some structural weakness, the good times can mask it. Like a buoyant economy with everyone spending, some not so well-run businesses can look like they're doing well. And what I found in our observation of the sector, and not just home improvement, but across retail, is there was already a very complex system of product and process and technologies that's formed, but there was instability in that based on disruption from Amazon and others. And as we hit the pandemic, that black swan moment, it was the first of what's become a rolling series of hits to the sector. And it's been incredibly tough to navigate. But if I look now, 2025, the one thing I'll say is with the tariff situation, there's so many, and I know Jason Tasse, who you know well, spoke to this at the beginning of the tariff situation, where he said, you know, this reminds him of April 2020. The good news is for those who've experienced it, you come out the other side and you're surviving and rebuilding. You kind of know you can do things that maybe you didn't know you had the muscle to do organizationally in the past. So while some are falling by the wayside, there's others that are probably better businesses today. And sadly, you know, it's another, we're going to go through another hit. But I think that's kind of what's going on with the incumbents. And then as space opens up, when some fall by the wayside, and again, I think it's just to me tragic what happened to Peavey. But as an example, as they fall by the wayside, there's opening for new models to come in. And in retail, everyone started with one, so there's a lot of hope as well.
Okay. And you know, you've also expressed about, you know, Hudson's Bay company no longer being able to stay relevant. What is your definition of retail relevance, especially in 2025 for home improvement detailers? And is there something that they can do today to make sure that they stay relevant?
Yeah, I just think it's at a very fundamental level, looking at the model that you're working with and saying, if there wasn't one of these today, would some bright entrepreneur introduce it into the marketplace? And I think that's a very healthy question to always be asking about your business. I think in the case of Hudson Bay, it's not unlike all the other traditional department stores of the past that were pretty big box. They got built out around suburban shopping centers, often in partnership. You know, people forget that through the 80s, Hudson Bay, Eaton's, a lot of these companies were real estate development companies, and they partnered with the shopping centers, and the suburbia got built from a retail perspective by them. So they sort of had a pinnacle, but instead of having the hubris to say, hey, in the 90s, we've maxed out on this, what's next? There was just a tripling down on how do we continue to extract value out of this for as long as we can. And that big box model that was designed at a time where there really was product exclusivity from the brands. You couldn't really find those brands elsewhere. Retail was pretty underserved even in the malls, and there was no online business. You know, in the future, all these things are changing, but what fundamentally had changed about the Hudson Bay Company as a business model? And not much. They tried to introduce new branding efforts or bringing in new product, but the model itself never changed. So I was always bearish on. I always thought it was a matter of when, not if, that was going to happen, and they outlasted a lot of their peers. But I think the lesson from that is always be cross-checking your fundamental model. Like, does this, in 5 years, would someone want to invent the thing that I've got because it's really serving the time and place in the market? And if not, you have a chance to disrupt yourself, and you can do it under your own timeline to some degree. But don't ignore it. And by the way, I just want to add that there's nothing wrong with the ownership of Hudson Bay saying we don't want to invent a new model. Our goal is to really take this as long as we can and extract as much as we can for the investors out of it. We may not like it as shoppers, and the brands may not like how that left them, but you know, that's a business decision. But I'm just saying, eyes wide open. Don't go in naively because you've had success in the past that you're going to have the same success in the future.
Right. And I suppose it's a bit different if you were to compare Hudson's Bay versus Eaton's, because that was definitely more family based. And I think as the successions happened, you know, different things fell off the wayside, and they were responsible for their own demise in a way.
Well, yeah, I guess that is the difference. The Eaton's family was sold involved in Eaton's. I think in both cases, the truth is they saw themselves as much as real estate companies, as portfolio companies at that point. And we were seeing the same thing in the States. I think there's always a culture in business that evolves, and we're coming out of an election cycle, so the term echo chamber came up a lot. But I think it's happened forever in retail, that retail tends to be pretty insular. And historically, I think most companies and small business as well, you spend so much time inside your business, you're not really seeing perspective from outside. And I think even in a category like home improvement, but certainly department stores, you have long-standing, long-tenured people who don't really know anything else. So what you think is a big change really isn't a big one on the outside looking in. And so I think that department store model, it was adhered to and it was tweaked. I don't know if it's as much about family versus not, but there is one thing you open the door to, if we're allowed to be really freewheeling. There's a trend going on in Canada right now where we're not in a high growth environment where we can develop organic growth. And because of the stresses on different chains at scale, we're seeing this trend for private equity to take out a lot of prior family businesses or privately held companies. And in the short run, there's a lot of appeal to that. The market's working properly because we're getting capital in and that brand can continue. But not all private equity is from the same cloth. And a lot have that same attitude that I think the Hudson Bay ownership had, which is we've now bought this brand or this model. How can we, with minimal investment, extend the life of this as long as we can, extracting as much value as we can? And we've seen aggregators do that with Ted Baker, like a lot of fashion brands were like that, where the quality just isn't what it was. The stores are gone, and it's just, you can continue to do flash sales. That's not all private equity. There's a lot of other variants, but there's a concern I have that in a private equity model, we're not really reinventing the future. We're trying to extend the past as long as we can. And that's a little red flag for me from a Canadian perspective, that if we're out of balance on the number of scaled operators that have leverage to build a new future, and that's disappearing, it is in my bearish bucket list of things to watch out for.
Okay. And also speaking about, future AI in particular, how do you see small and medium-sized businesses in the home improvement sector embracing AI, especially when they're under those larger banners?
Yeah, and we're talking a lot now. So in my innovation course, we do about 2 solid sections on AI, and then we're talking about where it might be applied in the short and long run. But I might make that more of a broader conversation around the idea of innovation and technology as it relates to small business. And there's 2 observations there. One is a generational observation, and it's a stereotype. But what I see is for young people that are developing, say, direct-to-consumer brands online, they themselves are pretty tech savvy as owners. And so naturally, technology is embedded. If anything, they struggle with actually having a physical store because that's their muscle they've got to develop. But the tech they're pretty adept to, and inherently, without much thought, they're building it into their program. For, again, stereotype, but for older entrepreneurs who have a family business, there's often a very personal fear or discomfort with innovation in their own lives. So therefore that spills over to their business, and it's either denial, hey, that doesn't apply to us, or I can't, it's going to be too expensive or cumbersome. That in itself is a problem, because the future, all retail now has an element of technology that's at its backbone. And if you don't have that, doesn't mean you can't succeed in certain cases, but you're definitely putting yourself at a disadvantage. The other aspect is what technology is accessible to you as a small business. And a lot of the leading edge technology is always developed for the Walmarts and the Loblaws, and it's really expensive. It's not even scaled really to suit small enterprise. And AI is a bit like that too. But if we watch the patterns, it always starts to find its way down to smaller operators. And so not getting involved and learning about it to some degree means when it is available, you're starting from zero where other people have already been in the game. And I might add that, and I spoke to an amazing person, Kerry Covent, who built all the AI out at Canadian Tire Corp since 2017, and really articulate, great business thought leader. And we talked about this issue, and her view, which I'm giving her credit, but I also subscribe to, is a small business doesn't necessarily have to become technological experts on AI when some of the tools they're already using are beginning to do the job of bringing AI in. So, for example, Shopify would be a good one where they're really committed to building tools into their platforms. The one thing I'll add for those who aren't expert is AI isn't just about money. It also, if you're tailoring it to the promise of taking your own data and finding and building new things from it, it needs an awful lot of data to be productive. And so a lot of small businesses just don't have that data set. So what the best they're going to be able to do is take sort of more generic level data from the sector or the, a regional or national sector database that, say, Shopify might be using for home improvement, indie retail, and kind of crowdsourcing that in and applying it. But just be, again, eyes wide open, educate yourself.
Okay, great. And you've observed behaviors towards Canadian buying local. Do you think this is temporary or something that's going to redefine customer loyalty long term?
Yeah, I'll start by saying I have a job to do, but I'm also a proud Canadian. So as that movement started, I personally got right behind it. I believe in it, and so I might have a little bias in what I'm about to say, but in tracking consumer trends, I'm going to say a long time. There's always been a lot of virtue signaling around values-based shopping. That could be green, or it could be buy Canadian, buy local. What I mean by that is we do research, we do a lot with Angus Reid Group and others, and so if you ask the question, what should you do, or what is your intent? People want to buy green. And even now, when that's sort of not as cool anymore, that's still it's there. Buying local has always been a values-based intention. But then when we ask, what did you do? How have you shopped? There's a big drop off, and it's not to zero, but it goes down into like maybe the 10 to 20% for both green and shop local or Canadian. And part of that is because there's always a trade-off. It's going to cost more, it's less convenient, product quality, you can go down and down. I have never seen behavioral change like I have since January of this year, where people are actually canceling trips, like they're making that trade-off. How long they might do that, we may hit a point of fatigue, but I also think there's this idea that whenever you're doing change of habits, by the time you get to what do they say, the 28 days, right? So
Right.
you get to a certain point and you are consciously looking at the labels, and you get to the point where you're not having to consciously do it anymore, you're doing it kind of habitually. There's always going to be a residual then shift, and it's going to be more effort to revert back than it is to keep going down the path. So I think this is incredibly important. I'm seeing a lot of backlash and calling out if there's call it Canadian washing, where there's claims made that are really suspect. So I would be very careful about how you're framing your activity, and not every retailer has the luxury of being able to say all their stuff is Canadian that they're selling, right? It's reality, but you do your best. Where I see things possibly going is with trade barriers coming down internally, creating more opportunity. And if we get more of a systems approach to this Canadian movement, we may see funds flowing into more manufacturing. But all these are like, this is complicated, and it's not up to one vendor to suddenly be able to serve Canada. But if we see the opportunity, I think more and more structural change might happen. And I think we might actually see more choice for your retailers to then source from Canada. It'll never be 100%, but I see a future where that could be a possibility.
And in terms of how that might relate to supply chain disruptions or the shape of pricing going forward?
Yeah, so they're all, I always look at retail as a system, right? And it's easy to kind of do the 3 soundbite, hey, here's what it is. But all these parts interchange. It's a system model. And so supply chain disruption has already been having an impact on the sector, certainly price wise, because that has to get passed on. There's only so much a chain level and let alone an independent can absorb. But it also ends up sparking innovation in its own right. So we're finding there's new ways of investment in logistics and AI, by the way. A lot of the AI isn't about a shiny tool for a customer to use. A lot of it is back of house. It's and the Walmarts and the Canadian Tire Corps. A lot of these players are developing the future, which then will be copied. But it's really looking at how do we optimize supply chains and risk proof them. In the past, it was largely about how do we strip cost out of it, and that could be a sole source, say Chinese facility is going to ship, and the more we simplify it, the more it's faster and cheaper. And what we learned from the pandemic is we've gone too far that way. We need to risk mitigate it. So we need maybe fail safes and multiple sources. All that's in play right now, but you don't have to, as an individual, a retailer, you're not going to be able to solve that world, but be aware of that change going on and trust that there will be innovators on the ground that are going to find other ways to bring product in.
Right.
But that the idea that retail's a system and the pricing, it's so hard. Your audience knows this. It's incredibly hard for an independent to do anything that's low price. You've got to stay within a band. But that's outside of their control. But being better at your sourcing, I think, and being very vigilant as to where there are other options emerging and being first in, having exclusivities with new vendors.
Right. Okay. I think maybe, unless you really wanted to talk about question 5, is we could skip that one.
What was 5?
About succession planning and digital tools and younger technology, if you want to.
Why don't we save it to the end, and then
Yep.
You can always.
All right. Sounds good. Okay, so for number 6 then.
Actually, you know what? I think it themes up here. Can we just cover it and then you can cut it?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure we have enough time for you to keep you on here. But yes, absolutely.
If you want me to shorten some of this up, I'll look in the, Sarah, you send a chat message. If I'm rambling a bit, just get me to tighten, I'll tighten. So this notion of independent family business and sort of a generational maybe divide around technology comfort and adoption of new tools. One of the things that I advise is to be thinking about succession planning before you need to. So in other words, younger, and it doesn't have to be a family member. It could just be a really trusted staffer who you can grow with. And if I think of Lee Valley Tools, Jason Tassay is not family, but he's become pretty much like family to the Lees, and that was one way of doing it. I think there's a couple of opportunities. So one is if it's a family member, if son or daughter, the Rosen family of Harry Rosen fame, Ian Rosen, who's now running it really adeptly. Like, that's a tough business to be doing fashion, men's fashion right now through the pandemic and onward. But he went away and he learned a lot of leading business practices, like right outside of retail with, some of the big consultancies. did his degree, then came back. So that's one thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get more value coming back in with your next person up than simply learning about how we do things today? And by the same notion, whoever it is will have a younger set of eyes. And I think putting someone like that in charge of your technology program is not a bad move. And but being able to, you're going to have to invest, and that's one thing I think it's hard for independent owners to do. Is there's the cost every month and every quarter, but putting money aside and saying we're going to put money into this because we'll benefit from it later. But there are benefits from doing this, both from a customer acquisition retention point of view, but also from a efficiency and speed and a future-proofing point of view.
Great. And as far as customer service goes, and in relation to AI as well, do you think there's a decline to customer service because of the chatbots or the automation, or is there any way that retailers can strike a balance between that?
Yeah, I did a piece at your conference where I talked about the customer no longer being king or queen. And we'll still hear that's the case, but I really do think the investor is in tight control of sort of the biggest influencer in the stakeholder group right now. And by that, I mean a lot of things are getting done in retail broadly that don't benefit us as shoppers. We're told it will, and it does. And I'll give you a perfect example is there's a move for more and more use of third-party call centers or chat support. And that's now getting more AI driven where it's a chatbot dialogue. And I'll just ask your listeners and viewers, how many times does that go really, really well for you? And it almost always doesn't. And you go, why are they doing this? Like, I just need to talk to someone. I'm not stupid. I've gone to YouTube, I've done the other things. But that's getting done because there's this lure of cost saving, right? And that's ultimately what's driving it. And the cost saving is you could argue it's to benefit, maybe we can keep prices low, but often that's really the investor in the business, the bank and the investor being driving the driving force. The big advantage, the superpower of independent physical store grounded businesses is you can really offer solutions and get ahead of this. Retail isn't dead. Physical retail is not dead at all. And sometimes that is the place where you get that advice. Where it fails is when you go in for that advice and the staff don't know what they're talking about, or people aren't attending to you, or they don't have time for you. So I think the power of independence is usually an owner's around and their imprints there and they're good at it. I would just encourage that. Don't just wait for the call to come in. Think about what's on people's minds right now, and how do we get in front of that and kind of say proactively, are you having an issue? If you're trying to stretch your budget and remodel one of the rooms, kitchens seem to be a trend right now. People are dining in more. Are there ways you can kind of inspire and convey that dialogue where they actually do ask questions of you, either online or in store? And there's so much creative opportunity to do that that's untouched.
Great. Do you feel that there's a shift in business priorities from customer service customer? Let me start again. Do you feel that there may be a shift in business priorities from customer service or customer centric or investor centric? And how do you think that might change the future of retail strategy and the customer experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things go in these trends, there's a herd effect. And as I said earlier, there's sort of a culture we develop on how we run businesses. And I think with the reaction to the surge of Amazon and online, a lot of businesses defaulted into thinking, well, all we're doing is offering a product and we have to keep trying to get it out at the lowest price. But the market is segmented. And even if I'm a defined segment, I have different needs in different situations. And Amazon is certainly In our research at Black Friday, Amazon was shopped at least once over that Black Friday month by close to 60% of the Canadian public. It's insane. But home improvement, more than anything, there's sort of solutions needed, not just the tool. And you're not going to be able to fight the pricing of a particular niche tool that often you can't carry all of them, if it's a really specialty item. But don't worry about it. Where you have an advantage, as I'm alluding to, is you can help people with their problems as opposed to just selling them a thing. And I think service is part of it, but it's also anticipating how people begin exploring a project, or how they even discover a need. By the way, how do they discover you? How many first-time shoppers do you get in? Do you track that? Do you know? And how many are one-time buyers that never come back? And why is that? Right? But if you want to get people in, I'll give you a really easy example, just a tactic. I can't tell you the number of times I'm on a mobile device and I'm searching to see if a store is open, what their hours are, and it's incorrect on Google.
Right.
That's not Google's fault. Each store owner controls what they put in there. And we've pointed that out to chains where I go, you're not paying attention to this. And they go, oh my God, we didn't realize. Even if it's the stat holiday closure,
Right.
or something else is up, that's easy. Just keep that stuff up to date, because that might be the difference between me as a first timer going to you and having a good experience, or driving there and it's closing, or I'm never coming back. Right? So there's that part of it. There's we're going to sell to you, all that. I think retail's pretty adept at. How much follow-up do you do? And I can't tell you the number of companies, even small business now, that's collecting my contact information. But I really don't get a lot of relevant messaging. I get spammy push sell stuff, but I don't get, recently I'm trying to regenerate a garden area, and the soil needs work and all those sorts of things. And I can do something for this season right now, but it's going to probably take a year. Well, I won't say the chain, but they were really helpful in that moment. But they could have got my information, and they could be following up midsummer to say, hey, how's that going? And here's something you could be doing on that project. And I know this sounds time consuming, but this is where the technology can help make that an efficient model.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. How do you see e-commerce evolving in the home improvement space, especially for products that are traditionally considered, hands-on or hard to ship?
Yeah, so when I teach the course, I kind of talk about, I have this jokey thing, because everyone has the power of, and they fill in something that becomes their book title. Mine's the power of and. I think we always try and devolve things into one or the other. So it's like stores or e-com. The world is and it's not just e-com, it's digital. So if we think about that idea of how am I figuring out what store to go to, there's a whole lot of prep work around that. And how easy is it online to get information on that store? How helpful is it? I'll give you an example. There's a different category, but there's a regional smaller family business called House of Knives. It was a regional franchisee of what used to be a national chain, now defunct. But Andre Yang and his brother kept the name out west, and they have a handful of stores. He is on local TV in the morning showing all kinds of cool knife prep and what you can do with your knife. Like, it's just demo stuff, and he's very engaging. So that's not selling necessarily online, but he's using that digital property then becomes part of their social media. There's a whole front end to it. But if you're talking literally about selling and e-com, Retail Council of Canada just put out a study that your audience may be interested in, by a vendor sponsored by a vendor called Flip.
Yes.
And it's about home improvement, Canadians and home improvement interests this season. And it's just confirming what I think we all know, that people are using online to do a lot of their research, but stores are still the dominant channel to actually go in and buy. And I don't see that. There's a lot of issues around buying online. Same with furniture, right? Like it's cumbersome. If the online is to be convenient, if it's Saturday morning, it might be easier for me to go to the nearest store and load up the trunk with the stuff I need than to put an online order in that might come 3 days later. So ecom isn't always solving everything, and then the cost of that shipment. What if something's wrong? How can you take it back to a store?
Exactly.
All those things we now deal with all the time. So stores are not an inconvenient option. In many cases, they're the more convenient option. And I think for home improvement, that's still going to be the case. I'm not too worried about it. But just operating your store without any thought of how are people learning about you and about their, their project, and then what happens after, you're leaving a lot to chance that your business is going to be healthy in the future.
Right. Like if you go online, you see that the product is there, it's in stock, it's at your location, you know where to find it. You can go and see it in person. I think it's still very, very important.
And talk to people, and it's just learning a little bit, right? I think you've got experts that go, I just know exactly what I want. I don't need it today. Maybe I will go to Amazon. Well, you're not going to fight that. Right? That's always going to be part of you're not going to be the sole supplier for every customer in your customer database.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. It was great having you on, and we will look forward to seeing you in Banff in October then, if you're going to be at the conference.
Yeah, I'll be presenting there, and I look forward to seeing you guys. But also, I really enjoy meeting the dealers. That's the entrepreneurial spirit, coast to coast in Canada, and it's alive and well. And we'll see you in the fall.
Thank you. Sounds good. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.